Okay, within marriage, um, the sexual relations is actually commanded. You are not, neither of the marriage partners are to withhold themselves from the other. That also is a form that is a form of sin if without consent of both parties, one person uh, will not engage in sexual relationship, because that's part of the duty of the husband and the wife to their mates. Okay. Verse 9 then, let's go on, is having a little change in focus now. We had been talking about sexual practices. Now he's going to be talking about love. Verse 9. Now as to the love of the brethren. Okay, now this is basically, there's three directions of love for the Christian. The first is to God, our love for God, and then there's the love for our fellow human beings. Our love for them would be for their salvation. We exhibit or practice love toward them so that they will be brought to Christ. And then thirdly, there's the love for our fellow Christians. Okay, so the love of the brethren now is what he's going to be talking about. And he says, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves are taught by God to love one another. Okay, so now that we have God dwelling in us, because our body is a temple of God, and if we are if we want to be pleasing to God, and we are listening to God as we read His Word and we listen to the ministers teaching the Scriptures and so forth, then God teaches us through the Scriptures and through His teachers, His ministers. And so as we listen to God, then we are taught by God to love one another. And verse 10, for indeed you do practice it toward all the brethren who are in all Macedonia. Okay, now the Christians, the new Christians there in Macedonia, were very exceptional because they had taken to Christianity so fast, and word had spread about how they were such good Christians, and they were loving one another, and they were helping one another and taking care of one another, and their lives were changed, and they were living for God, and they were living sanctified lives. And so what Paul is hearing about them is all good, but he still is concerned simply because they are such new Christians, and so he is writing these instructions to them as preventative measures. There's no indication that these new Christians had actually fallen back into their old practices, but like any good parent would do to their children, he is teaching them the standards of Christianity. So this is what he's doing. Right now it's preventative mostly, but that's what the job and the duty of a parent is to do. You don't wait until after the fact, till it's too late. Then it's harder to bring them back to the right way, to the way of God. Okay, so there, toward the end of verse 10, it says, but we urge you, brethren, to excel still more. So in other words, be constantly growing, constantly developing in your sanctification as you keep putting these bad habits and practices out of your lives, other ones will come to your attention. It seems like there's always uh, ones that are hidden from our view. It's kind of like we're blind to them. So when we get rid of the most glaring ones and get victory over those, then those that were kind of submerged, those come to the top, and we see those, and it's a never-ending struggle. But we are to excel in our progress in sanctification, and we will never reach perfection because we are imperfect. No man is perfect. And so we will never say, well, the job is done. I have gotten rid of all my bad habits. I'm totally sanctified, and I've arrived, and so I don't have to worry about this anymore. That will never happen as long as we are in this body. So we have to constantly work on it and constantly be vigilant, because the devil is always there. He knows what our weaknesses are. He's very subtle. He's very intelligent, far more intelligent than we are. And if we let down our guard, he's going to get in there and cause us to stumble and fall. Of course, we won't lose our salvation if we sin, but we will have our fellowship with God broken, and then that will need to be re-established. Our fellowship is just like the prodigal son who left home and he went out and he fell into sin and everything, but then he came back and he confessed his sin, and then he was restored to fellowship with the Father. Okay, so the story of the prodigal son, that's not a person losing his salvation and then coming back and getting saved again. It's talking about a saved person who rebels against God and goes out into sin, and then he repents and comes back, and God forgives him and brings him back in. That's the real lesson from the prodigal son. Okay, verse 11 gives a few more admonitions, a few more commandments. It says, and to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business and work with your hands just as we commanded you. Okay, a quiet life there would be opposed to like wild parties and things like that, rioting, as far as that kind of life of I don't know what's the word I'm looking for here, but anyway, wild parties, I guess, describes what I'm trying to say. Okay, so live a quiet life of sanctification. Attend your own business, so don't go meddling in other people's business as if they were your servants and you know better what's for them. But be concerned about your own business, especially your own relationship to God and your own life, and doing what God has commanded us to do, living our lives as sanctified lives before the people in the world, as far as our witness to them, and also the actual sharing of the gospel with those people. That's all part of our business. Now remember, Paul was pretty much on his own here, and he was receiving very little support, financial support, as he went around preaching, and so he himself had an occupation of a tent maker or a leather worker, and that's kind of like a job where you can work at that almost anywhere. You could go, if you knew that trade, you could go almost anywhere and find work. And so this is what Paul did to support himself, to set an example so that he wouldn't be just feeding off of them and they would have to support him, which he could have done. Because he was an apostle, he could have said, well, I'm devoting all my time to preaching the gospel, and so you Christians should support me and take care of my financial needs and take care of my housing and my clothing and everything else. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to set an example. So he would work at his trade of tent making and leather working to earn the money to support himself, and then he would go out and on the Sabbath days he would go and preach in the synagogues, and on the rest of the week he'd go out into the marketplaces, to the town squares, anywhere there was a crowd, and he would preach to them. So he was supporting himself so that he would not be a financial burden on anyone. And so that's what he says each one of us should do. He says, work with your own hands, support yourself. Don't be a burden on other people. Now, you know, there's always people who, if they see charity going on, they have this talent for going in and taking advantage to it. They're called freeloaders, you know, and that's the way it is. A lot of people, the church, they would see the church was a society that they took care of one another, and so they would go in and join the church and just freeload off of them. Well, the church is supposed to take care of those who are unable to take care of themselves, whether it be mental or physical incapacity. If a person just doesn't have a skill, they should try and help him get a skill. But laziness is not to be tolerated in the church. And so it says that everyone is to work with their own hands. Now, some people have mistakenly said that the early church was like communism, where everybody contributed to the pot, and then whoever had need would dip out of the pot. Well, that's not communism in the sense that we know it, as it was practiced in Russia and China and North Korea and Cuba and places like that, where people were forced, you know, to give most of their stuff to the government. Actually, the way communism was practiced in the communist countries of the day was a perversion of what the true communism was. The true communism was where every member of the community was taken care of, and if they had temporary need, then he could be taken care of by the community on a temporary basis. But it was never intended to be the way it was practiced in last century by Russia and China and those places that were communist nations. So that's a word that's kind of got confused meaning. But anyway, this is the way the church was. If any of the members were destitute, they would be taken care of. Like the aged, the widows who had no income, but everyone who was able to do something was expected to do something. It doesn't matter whether they could just be a watchman to guard the place and sound the alarm if there was anything went wrong, or if anybody was trying to break in. You know, even a person with a lot of disabilities would be able to do something like that. But everybody who was able to do something would do something. And the overall statement was, if a person doesn't work, he doesn't eat. And so in other words, there'll be no freeloaders. But of course, if a person can't, if he's got disabilities, mental, physical, or otherwise, then of course they are taken care of. But if a person is able to do something, no able-bodied person is allowed to just sponge off the church. Okay, and then verse 12 says, so that you may behave properly toward outsiders and not be in any need. So this is the reason why people are to work with their own hands and support themselves, because of your testimony to the outsiders, and so that everybody will be taken care of. Everybody's needs will be met. And this is talking about genuine needs. Okay, so we're ready to move into the next section, but I want to spend a little more time on that, but we can maybe come back to it next time. But I said about all I had to say about the first 12 verses. So let's go on and read starting verse 13, where he's taking a kind of like a side trip because there is another concern, and Paul had taught them a lot about the future and eternal life and the coming return of Christ, the rapture, things like that, but there were still some questions about that the people didn't understand. Paul did not have enough time to give all the details, and so now he's going to be filling in some more here about the future and the return of the Lord. As we say, verse 13, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep. This is talking about Christians who have died. Their bodies are in the grave, and we don't talk about them as being dead because they are going to be resurrected. So we just talk about them as being asleep in the grave. So their bodies are asleep in the grave. So that's what we talk about. Christians who have died, their bodies are in the grave, and their souls had gone to heaven to be with God. Is absent from the body, is present with the Lord. So we just say that they are asleep because it's only temporary. They will be raised again. So when he's talked about asleep, he's talking about Christians who have died. Okay, we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as do the rest, that is the unsaved, who have no hope. The hope is the resurrection and the going to be with God for all eternity. Verse 14, for if we believe, and this is if we do this, and we do, for if we believe, and we do believe, that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. Okay, so to fall asleep in Jesus means that you are a Christian and your body has died. Okay, so that's what it's talking about, Christians who die. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord shall not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Okay, so this is a subject in which he had not been able to thoroughly explain or teach. He had to leave because of the persecution. Okay, so they are still uninformed. Their knowledge is not complete. So he's going to fill them in now about those who have died. Okay, so this is, we say, the coming of the Lord. And it's two ways of, there are two comings. One is the coming to the earth, and that is the second coming of God to the earth. But there is this coming in which Jesus doesn't come to the earth, he just comes to the air. Okay, so we talk about the coming of the Lord. We should really specify clearly whether we're talking about Jesus coming to the air, which we refer to as the rapture, which is the next thing in biblical prophecy, And then there's the second coming of Christ to the earth. Just like he came the first time when he was born into the earth, he came to the earth. So, the rapture is not the second coming. The rapture is a coming, but he doesn't come to the earth. He comes just as far as the air. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at this. Now, the normal thing for an unsaved person to do is to grieve unconsolably, because when a person dies, they are in complete ignorance as to what has happened to that person. They don't know. All they have is, myths and traditions and fairy tales and stuff. And so when an unsaved person dies, the unsaved people, they grieve because they have no idea what's going to happen in the future. So that's talking about the rest who have no hope. With the unbelievers, they do not have any hope of a resurrection, of the joining again of the soul with the body, and then living forever with God. But those of us who are Christians, who believe that Jesus died and rose again, says, even so, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. Okay, so the next event in biblical prophecy is the rapture. And when the rapture happens, all those who have died, their bodies are in the graves, but their souls are in heaven with Jesus. So when Jesus comes, those souls will return with Jesus, but they will only go as far as the air. They will not get to the ground. And so now Paul explains that. He says, for this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord, and this is the coming through the air, shall not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout. And so when he comes, the souls of all those who have already died will come with him. And their bodies will be resurrected, and their souls will be reunited with their resurrected body. That's the immortal body. This body we're in now is a mortal body. It can die. That's what mort means. That's the Latin word for death, mort. These bodies are mortal. That means they can die. The resurrected bodies are immortal. That means they can't die. Nothing bad can happen to them. They can't starve to death. They can't be injured. They can't be burned. Nothing bad can happen to our immortal bodies. So the souls that have already died, who are in heaven right now, will come back with Jesus. Their bodies will be resurrected. They will get their immortal bodies, and they will be reunited. And that's the way they will be for all eternity, in their immortal bodies, those bodies which are fit to live forever in heaven. Now, what about those who are still alive on the earth when Jesus comes? It says that he will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God. Okay, 3 times when Jesus raised the dead when he was on earth, one time he stood outside Lazarus' tomb and he said, Lazarus, come forth. The little 12-year-old girl and also the young man who is the son of the widow, to both of them he said, arise. So perhaps he will say something like that, a combination. Arise, come forth, or something like that. And so all those believers, all those Christians then, who are alive, they will then be transformed. Their bodies will be transformed instantly from their mortal bodies into their immortal bodies. And when he shouts, that's as he comes from heaven to earth, he shouts and says, arise, come forth, and all those who are dead, their bodies will rise from the tomb, just like Jesus' body came out of the tomb. their bodies will come out of their graves, and their bodies then will be the immortal body. So then we have those who had been dead and were raised, reunited with their souls, and then we have those who were alive on the earth, their bodies are transformed, and then together, he says, verse 17, then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them, that is the ones whose bodies had just been resurrected. So we have the two groups, those who were alive and those who were dead, are now together on the earth, and we're caught up to meet the Lord in the air. See, Jesus doesn't come to the earth. He comes only to the air, and we're caught up to the air to meet him in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air. So this is the rapture. Now, rapture, we talk about like eagles and hawks and stuff, we call those raptors. You know, like if a rabbit is on the ground, the eagle will swoop down, clutch the rabbit, and carry him off. Okay, that's what a raptor does. And the talons are called raptors. And this is what's going to happen. Jesus is just going to catch us up. It's like an eagle swooping down on a rabbit or a fish or something. You ever see movies with that? That's the way we are going to be caught up, to meet the Lord in the air. See that word, caught up? That's the word rapture in the Greek, or in Latin, I should say. So this is where we get the rapture from. Okay? That they are going to be caught up together. So both those who had been dead and were raised, and those who were alive and were transformed, will be caught up together, raptured, to meet the Lord in the air. They're caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And thus we shall ever be with the Lord. So from that moment on, forever, we will be with Christ. And so this is our comfort. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. So we're not like the unbelievers who grieve. We are sad when one of our loved ones dies, of course. But this is a sadness that has hope behind it. We are sad, but we know that there will be a rejoining with them. We will meet them again. We have hope. And we will be with our loved ones for all eternity, but it's like the sadness of a temporary separation. We don't have and enjoy their presence for a while, but then if we die before the Lord comes, then our souls will go to heaven and we'll be with them. Or if the Lord returns, then they will be resurrected and we will be with them. So no matter how it turns out, we can't lose. See, because it's only a matter of a few years when we will be reunited with our loved ones who had died, who were Christians. Okay. So we'll stop here then and continue next.